especially those who have young children or teenagers who grew up here, the second generation, because they see Christmas with all the glory and all the lights and everything, but we don't do enough for our Prophet's birthday. So this year we're going to have live music. The band that was here for our annual dinner, the Muslim band, they will be here. Not Al-Firdos. Al-Firdos will be here on November 15th. But on September 21st is the Muslim band from local Muslims will be playing some celebratory music for that event. And we'll have, one short lecture, but it's all about celebration. And so, inshallah, children from Mishkat school will participate in, and maybe they will have some game or some activity. So hopefully we'll celebrate and have a good time for the 21st of September. And November 15th, we will have Al-Firdos here for a concert. They just came out with a song for Gaza, and they did, I think they did 21 miles walk for Gaza in January, I think. And he wants to dedicate this concert to a struggle of people in Gaza. So they will be here on November 15th. Our guest speaker, if you don't know him, Dr. David Coolidge is a frequent lecturer at the center as an Imam. And I recommend you go to info@iccnc.org and listen to some of his khutbah, especially his khutbah on July 12, 2024. I think it was like a day before Ashura, or a couple of days before Ashura. I highly recommend that you listen to that khutbah. It really moved me. He shared with us some of his personal experience. Dr. David Coolidge got his PhD from Graduate Theology Union. He lectures at GTU, Graduate Theology Union, as well as at Bayan Graduate School. This semester, coming semester, he's teaching history of man from Muslims' perspective. And I read that Facebook took that announcement off. I don't know what part of it was offending to people, but if you follow him on Facebook, he has very good posts. He's a deep thinker, and prior to his study at GTU, he was a chaplain at a couple of Ivy League schools at Brown and Dartmouth, I think. And he's from East Coast, but we are lucky through marriage. Now he's in West Coast. His wife works here, so he's here. We're lucky to have him. And if you know American history, go read about Calvin Coolidge, one of the American presidents. This brother is related to Calvin Coolidge, but he gave up all that glory and came to the path of Islam, and he's and we are honored to have him as one of us. And but without further ado, I'm going to ask David to come forward and present us with his lecture. Salawat.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. Alhamdulillah alladhi 'allama bil qalam. All praise is due to God who taught by the pen. 'Allama al insana ma lam ya'lam. Taught humanity that which they did not know. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi wa sallam. I'd just like to begin with thanking this community for welcoming me. We moved here 6 years ago, about 15 minutes away from here. And I have a vague memory of knowing about this place. I feel like maybe once Professor Omid Safi came here and spoke years ago, and maybe I saw an announcement about that, so I looked it up, 15 years ago or 10 years ago, and I said, there's a space in Northern California that's sort of cultural, but also masjid, and that's intriguing. But I didn't know it was so close when we moved. And so once we were here, oh, where am I going to pray Salatul Jummah? I knew about Lighthouse because I had quite close with Imam Zaid Shakir, who was the founder of Lighthouse, and I had been to the original Lighthouse, which is a couple blocks north, very small space. So when I found that this place was so close, I said, oh, 15 minutes away, just on the other side of the lake, I got to go check that out. And at the time, it was Hashim Alauddin and Rashid Sanem kind of back and forth, 1 week on, 1 week off, khutbahs. And if you were around at that time, they had very different styles, but it was great. It was sort of like, a dialectic, yin and yang almost. And a brother named Micah Anderson, who I had been close with when I was on the board of Ta'leef Collective down in Fremont a number of years ago, 10, 12 years ago, I can't remember. He was coming here too, because he was living actually a couple of blocks away from us in Oakland. So all of a sudden it was this kind of new experience in this new place, and I was like, oh yeah, cool. But I was an unknown quantity here. Before I moved out here and before I had shifted to talking about things like Imam Husayn alayhi salam, I had been a, fairly well-known Sunni speaker on the East Coast. I came out here and, not many people knew who I was, or if they knew me, it was probably from the Sunni community. And then all of a sudden they're asking me to give the khutbah here. And I'm like, okay, sure, I'll do my best if you really need me to. Brother Payman and Ali Sheikh al-Islami, were really encouraging and welcoming. And I said, at one point I sat down with both of them and I was like, all right, just tell me about the masjid. Tell me about the community. I want to know a little bit more about what I'm getting into here. And they were very frank about, the history of the community and getting me up to speed. But then, over the years, there have been these kind of inflection points. Now it's 6 years, so now it's, we have a history together. And, there was the period where they needed me to do more khutbahs. So I said, I can do 6 in a row. And that was a couple of years ago. And, it was the second or third khutbah I gave. Our brother, Abu Hassan Muhtabad, Allah have mercy on him, was the person who would always do the audiovisual. And then, later in the week, I get the email and the text message that he had passed away. Something that just, now those of you who knew him knew that, his English wasn't great. So we had these kind of short, pleasant conversations, but it's just it's such a wonderful presence. I can still see him so clearly in my mind and our little, interactions during Jummah. And, that was a particularly poignant moment, for many of us. He is now someone I regularly make dua for, and I read Quran for, and I give sadaqah for, and hope to see him again in the next life. So then, there was sort of learning about Support Life Foundation and all the work that Suzanne Herbad does in terms of feeding the community here, and, just kind of all these successive stages of learning about what happens here. And so to be asked to speak for Arbaeen on such a sacred occasion is deeply meaningful to me, that this is where this journey has led, right? Lita'arafu, as the Quran said, we made you different, right? We were born in different places, to different families, to different political realities, to different economic conditions, and now here we are through God's beautiful arrangement. And so I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been part of that before I say anything else. So we're here for Arbaeen, right? Those of you who know what it is, know what it is. And if anyone doesn't, it's the 40th day after the 10th of the month of Muharram, which is the day that the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, Husayn ibn Ali, was martyred, along with many of his other family members and friends and supporters. And then those who were left alive were taken into captivity. So we've gone through the first 10 days of Muharram and we've had that mourning cycle. And what I wanted to talk my remarks about is broadly understood under culture and religion, right? We need like a framing idea. Because of the reality that, I did not grow up into the culture of Azadari, right? All of this is technically foreign to me. When I was, I don't know, 8, 9 years old, 10 years old, we had the Christmas pageant. And I dressed up like a shepherd, right? Because at our church, you have the 3 wise men come in and visit the baby Jesus, and you'd sing some songs, and the kids would get dressed up. And that was my culture, right? So some of you may have heard recently that the very pro-atheist evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins called himself a cultural Christian. Well, I'm a cultural Christian too, right? I grew up Christian. I grew up in this culture, right? I appreciate a beautiful church. I appreciate beautiful paintings and, American and European history. But religiously, in terms of my metaphysics, I'm a Muslim. He's culturally Christian and his metaphysics are just, empirical, secular, evolutionary biology and however he sees that playing itself out in society. So what's the big deal of calling yourself a cultural Christian? I'm a cultural Christian. I'm wearing a sport coat. I have white skin. Right? I have blue eyes. I don't know if Richard Dawkins has blue eyes. But sometimes people, use these things as a way to like drive a wedge between people, right? As opposed to a way of unifying people. And the reality is that, my culture and the way that I was raised is still a part of me. At the same time, that adopting various practices, various ethics, believing in certain things became part of expressing myself as a Muslim religiously. And there's nothing that I could ever do to become Mauritanian. There's nothing I could ever do to become Egyptian. There's nothing I could ever do to become Syrian or Iranian or Pakistani or whatever the case may be. I am and will always be an American. My family came, from England, from near the town of Cambridge in 1630. John and Mary Coolidge came to the Massachusetts Bay Colony and settled in Watertown, Massachusetts. And so for almost 400 years, my family has been in North America. And our generation, at least in our specific lineage, is the first to reach California in all of that time, as far as we know. And me and my cousin who lives in San Francisco, is also named David, they're the first. And it was actually my great-great-grandfather was the first to leave the East Coast and start a farm in Illinois. And so, this succession of generations, right, which is the foundation of culture, my people, my ancestors, my forefathers, 400 years, they were American before there was an America, right, in the United States of America. And so I can't erase that, right? I can't change the way that I look. And this is a particular spiritual disease, I think, amongst, white converts. I'll speak just for us. That we almost want to erase our whiteness. And we want to pretend that we're some part of some Muslim culture. And I had one friend who was also a white American. He was telling me that he would love to go. He learned a little bit of Bosnian so that he'd go to the Bosnian masjid and like speak a little Bosnian back and forth with the Bosnian, so he could kind of pretend for a moment like he was Bosnian, but he's like, you know, German Roman Catholic heritage or something like that. And I actually understood that exact point, because the masjid that was closest to my parents' house in northern suburbs of Chicago was a predominantly historically Bosnian masjid. There was only about half Bosnian at Jummah. But I would go and I'd be like, yeah, like, hey, I'm like those guys over there, like we kind of look the same. You know, I didn't know any Bosnian. I didn't actually try to pretend that I was Bosnian, but there was like this weird psychological need to identify with like a historically Muslim culture. And, you know, I understand it, right? But I think that for myself, it was something I've been Muslim for 25 years now, I had to get over, right? I had to get over the feeling that if I'm dressed like I used to dress when I go to church, is that somehow less valid, you know, of a way of dressing and honoring that sacred occasion than wearing, you know, the shalwar kameez, the Pakistani outfits that my wife's uncles have given me as gifts. No, they both are, from the point of view of the Sharia, they both cover me properly. They both are considered like nice clothing to wear on a sacred occasion. And so, you know, you don't see Egyptians wearing shalwar kameez. And it's a Pakistani clothing. Sometimes you see Egyptians wearing, you know, Pakistanis wearing like Egyptian style thobes. I actually remember once I was when I was the chaplain at Brown University, a Turkish professor named Engin Akarli was still there, who had been when I was there as an undergrad and first converted, and now had come back as the Muslim chaplain. And there was some occasion I bought a thobe from this Western Muslim company called Shukr. And it was kind of popular Muslim clothing at the time. So I bought this thobe and I was like, I'm gonna rock that thobe at you know, some Muslim event. I can't remember what it was. And he was like, oh, very Egyptian. And I looked at it and I was like, didn't even dawn on me. But from his Turkish perspective, it was like, that's something an Egyptian would wear. Like that's a, you know, not a Saudi style, right? Egyptian style. And so, you know, going back to the verse that I hinted at, we're created to know each other, not to become exactly like each other. But what unifies us? What brings us together on the basis of faith? If I'm culturally Christian in some sort of way, then when I'm doing Muslim things, what is the basis of that? Well, what I wanted to speak about in my remaining time is the recognition that we live at a particular unique moment in Islamic history. We may not be aware of it. Right now, there are millions upon millions of people in Iraq from all over the world visiting Imam Husayn, alayhi salam. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala. In a way that was obviously not possible under the regime of Saddam Hussein. In a way that was not really possible and really kind of the zeitgeist during the British Empire, when the British kind of had control over Iraq. Not really possible under the Abbasid Khilafah. And going on back through history. There's never been a time in history when this many people from all across the world every year are walking to Imam Hussein saying, Labbaik ya Hussein. Here I am, O Hussein, at your service. And what we might not know, what we might not realize if we come from a historically Muslim culture, and especially if we come from a historically Shia Muslim culture, is that entire thing is not wajib. That entire phenomenon is not fard. It's not an obligation. No alim has ever said you have to do it or you're going to hellfire, right? No one has ever forced it down your throat. Now, maybe in a family, maybe in a village, maybe in a particular locality, a particular time and place, the culture was such that you felt like it was an obligation. Like, oh, my parents are going to take me to like Najaf for Arbaeen. I really don't want to go. But the reality is, in our teaching tradition, the tradition of the ulama, it is not something you have to do. right? So you have more people going for Arbaeen in Iraq than you have doing Hajj, which is wajib upon all adult Muslims who have the wealth and the ability and the health to do it, right? Now, one could say a lot about the different ways that those pilgrimages are managed by the national authorities, right? The Saudis have their way of doing it, and the Iraqis now have their way of doing it. So that's a worthwhile conversation, but it's kind of academic conversation we'll leave for another time. What I want you to reflect on in this moment is that this massive phenomenon that is unprecedented in Islamic history at this scale is being done voluntarily by people from all over the world. And why would people do that? Why would people walk from Najaf to Karbala? Why would people spend all that money on the plane ticket? Why would people take off of work? Why would people put themselves in uncomfortable situations and sleep on the floor if they have to? Why would they do that? For the same reason that a teenage boy will stay up all night thinking about a girl. For the same reason that a teenage girl will stay up all night thinking about a boy. Not concerned that he or she has schoolwork due tomorrow. Not concerned about what's going to happen on the next day. But because they're so overtaken with something deep inside their heart that it actually manifests in what sometimes seems like a little bit crazy behavior. It's love. At the end of the day, what makes people do that? Of course, you can't look inside people's hearts. But if people are willing to do this immensely challenging and expensive to a certain extent, and non-required thing, right? Wake up and pray Fajr prayer. Don't eat pig. Don't do this, don't do that. Oh, you don't have to go see Imam Husayn. No, I want to go see Imam Husayn. I'm there, I'm going again and again. I go and I want to go back. People do that for love. Right? That's what inspires them. So we know that one of the recommended practices for the day of Arbaeen is to recite Ziyara of Arbaeen. Right? For those of you who know the book Mafatih al-Jinan, the compilation of all these recommended practices written in the 20th century by Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi. It's one of the recommended practices mentioned in that book. I only want you to think of one line in the whole ziyarah for the rest of this talk. وَقَلْبِي لِقَلْبِكُمْ سِلْمٌ. And my heart is at peace with your heart. The deepest part of me, the part of me that has all of the hopes and the dreams and the fears of everything, that longs for the greatest beauty that I'm able to handle, longs for the greatest pleasure that I'm able to taste, longs for the greatest peace that I'm able to be enveloped within. That heart, the deepest heart, is at peace with the heart of Imam Husayn. And so when we remember the whole story of Ashura and Muharram, and we go through that process of thinking about what happened and remembering stories that we've heard so many times, we are reminding ourselves of something that has an external element. It has an external element in terms of the stories that are told, in terms of the poetry that is recited, in terms of the rituals that are done, in whatever way, from whatever culture. Again, as we know, there's different poetry in different cultures, different traditions in different cultures, and it's all good, right? Everyone's got their own way of doing it because it's not facing Mecca and Salah and reciting in Arabic Fatiha. And we all know that that's what's absolutely required of us at the base minimum. But we do this out of love. This because we're trying to get in touch with Imam Husayn. This because we want our hearts to be in synchronicity with the heart of Imam Husayn. And we have different ways of connecting with it, right? Very common in Majalis, reminding us that, Imam Husayn calls out, who is there to help me? And why would we tell that part of the story? So that we feel in our heart that we want to be there to help you, O Husayn. And so when I say I am culturally Christian, but religiously Muslim, right? It's because I don't identify with the story of the gospel in the same way that a Christian does. I have the normal Muslim way of saying, well, there's really beautiful and amazing things in the four gospels, but there's other things that we reject based upon our understanding of who Jesus was in light of the Quran. There's beautiful dialogue in the Quran, which takes place in essentially like the future in the next world, where God asks Jesus, "Did you really tell people to worship you and your mother?" He's like, "I don't know what's in you know what's in my heart. I don't know what's in your heart, Allah. I can't fathom the depth of your essence, your reality, but you know me completely because you created me, right? You know I never did that." And for the Muslim, we read that in the Quran, which we believe is revelation. We're like, done deal. Jesus never said to worship him. And then you can go and you can find hundreds and hundreds of books of interpretation of the Bible, some saying how to understand it this way, that way, whatever. For the Muslim, it's like, khalas, no, we're done. Jesus never told people to worship him. Let's move on. And that's what makes us religiously Muslim. And we don't struggle with that question, how exactly do you interpret the Bible and live it? That's a really Christian question. I love reading the Bible. I was just reading the Bible last night, not because I had to, but just I wanted to. But I don't take everything in there as gospel truth, as they say. Right? But when I'm reading the Quran, I feel like I'm on the hook. I feel like God is like, okay, I'm about to tell you some stuff that's gonna affect you, and it's going to put you on the hook, and you're going to have to respond. So when it says in a verse in Surah Ali Imran, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, qul in kuntum tuhibbuna Allah fattabi'uni." Say, O Muhammad, to humanity, if you love God, then follow me, follow Muhammad. And what is the walk of Arbaeen other than trying to walk and follow Husayn, who's trying to follow Muhammad, right? It's just one long caravan back to Muhammad, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And it says in that verse that, if you do that, then God will love you and forgive you your sins, right? Love, but love that is expressed through action. Some of you saw my wife and my kids earlier. It's nice to say I love you, and I do say I love you, but what they really want is for me to play with them. Go throw the baseball with me in the backyard. Show me that you love me. My wife, spend time with me. Put your book down. Pay attention to me. Show me that you love me. Right? I mean, for many of us, nobody doubts we love our job. Spend 60, 70, 80 hours a week working on that thing that you've been working on for 20, 30, 40 years. Yeah, sure, there's like an element of, sort of practicality to it, but, it's different than someone who just puts in those 40 hours a week, clocks out, and is like, all right, I'm going to the football game, crack open a beer, because that was just how I pay the bills, right? For a lot of people, their job is central to their identity, central to their aspirations, central to their hopes and their dreams. But do we express that with other people? We show them that we love them. We show our wives or our husbands that we love them. We show our children that we love them. We show our friends that we love them. None of us wants to say, I'm not a good family man. I love my wife and my kids. I love my family. That's usually what people say. But do our actions speak louder than our words? Does our deepest heart, is that reflected in how we actually live our lives? So when we see people voluntarily going to Karbala, it flips the script, as they used to say in English. It overturns what we thought we once knew about religion. And says to us, hey man, you're free to do what you want. And I think all of you in this room know that. All of you in this room know people that gave up on Islam. All of you in this room know someone who calls himself now a cultural Muslim, but they're religiously secular humanists, or religiously progressive, activists. But yeah, culturally they're Muslim in a way that I could never be. I wouldn't go to Eid prayer if it weren't for God. Like, and Eid prayer is not even, wajib either. When I take time out of my life to come to the masjid on a Friday at 1:00, if I didn't believe that God was going to be happy with me for doing it, no. I might go to church on a Sunday morning just to enjoy the music, just to connect with how it was when I was 10 years old, and I put on a suit and my parents said, all right, let's go to church. Memories, who I was, my people, and that's all fine and good. But on this day of Arbaeen, when we see ourselves as part of this global community that is remembering Imam Husayn, whatever way is meaningful for us, it is a chance for us to look within and ask ourselves sincerely, do I really want to be here? Is this really who I am? Because the whole story of Ashura and the whole story of the centuries of oppression and the centuries of persecution and the centuries of struggle to maintain the legacy of Ashura is about qalbi bi qalbikum sim. Let my heart be at peace with your heart. I don't know how and I don't know why I am the way I am. It's like a light was just switched on inside me when I went to my first majlis. Sheikh Fayaz Jafar was leading the majlis. Husayn, the spiritual revolution, I think was our Karbala, spiritual revolution was the theme. Told the story of Hor, never heard the name Hor ibn Yazid al-Riyahi, ever in my life. At 15 years as a Muslim, probably at that point, never heard that name. He tells the story. I'm shook, I'm trembling, I'm fascinated, I'm disturbed, I'm ashamed. I mean, the only thing for me, and I can't speak for any of you, but the only thing for me that I could put it in some sort of comparison to is falling in love. Like that first meeting, and you're like, wait, what? Whoa. And that's amazing, and that's wonderful. And when we think of the story, we think of those who stood up to the challenge. We think of those who rose to the occasion. We think of those who in that moment were asking themselves in their deepest heart, do I want to die for this? Do I really want to die for this? Again, no one's saying, the ulama have said, the marja has said, the leader has said, you have to do this. They were just saying, I want to do this. I want to be here. And so Muslim ibn al-Sajjad, radiallahu anhu, or whoever else comes to mind, stood up and did what they did. But Arbaeen reminds us that the story goes on. And it's very, very easy especially, and according to the Quran itself, if Allah gives you a good life, to lose touch with that feeling. As you go back to everyday life and you get wrapped up in everyday concerns, it's sometimes hard to connect with the drama and the intensity of that moment. But Arbaeen reminds us that even 40 days later, we have to reorient ourselves back to that plain of Karbala, reorient ourselves back to God through Imam Husayn, and ask ourselves what it means for my heart to be in tune with what the heart of Imam Husayn is expressing to us through all of this. And to me, that's what makes me religiously Shia, right? Is that I'm captivated by that idea. I'm captivated by the voluntary nature of my love for Husayn and the insane implications of it, that I want to dedicate my life to being in tune with that, so that I'm not like the Kufins, right? So that I'm not like the person that sells out when things really get difficult. Or I'm not like the person who just kind of goes back into daily life and forgets about it. You know, I don't know a lot about Iranian cinema, but I did watch most of Mukhtar Namer on YouTube. And one of the things I like about that particular film is the way in which Mukhtar is portrayed as someone who's just, he's so shook by what happened on Ashura that he can't let it go, right? And just forget about like the history of it, like the specificities of it, but just like the film, the cinematic presentation of it, right? It's, you know, from an American standpoint, it's like the great revenge story. It's like, man, they killed my brother. And now I'm gonna like spend the next 15 years like pumping iron and like, you know, get tattoos all over my body and like become this like super assassin or something to like, you know, set things right and have justice. You know, I mean, that's something that like I grew up with. And it was like sort of a type of masculine ideal, like John Wick. And then you guys are familiar with these films. Keanu Reeves can, you know, just nobody can stop him. And why do people, you know, identify with those stories just on a purely secular level? Is because the person has a singular focus and is able to morph their life in a way to achieve the goal that they've set out to achieve. But when I look at all these people going for Arbaeen, again, recognizing it's just 1 week out of the year, what does it represent to me symbolically as a religious Muslim? It represents that desire to say, I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know where I'm going to sleep. I don't know what I'm going to eat. But I'm going to, if it even takes me to crawl on my hands and feet to get to Imam Husayn, I'm going to get there. And that, for me, is like the only thing that I really had. Because I had been Muslim for 15 years and didn't understand even like the things about, I had to read a book, Liaquat Takim, Shiism in America, to understand like how people do different things on the day of Ashura. The Iraqis do it this way, and the Iranians do it this way, and the Lebanese do it this way, and the Pakistanis do it that way, and so on and so forth. And I was like, oh, that's too much drama for me. I just want to get to the same, you know? And, you know, but along the way, we realize that cultures are formed over time by people who are expressing their greatest aspirations. When you look, you know, at, I'll just give you an example. I was reading in the book Man and Universe by Mortaza Mutahari the other day, and he must have written this in the 60s or 70s. He's saying, you know, some people want to address the kind of nihilism in society by making people read Rumi and Hafiz and Saadi and other Persian poets. But it's not just secular literature. It's steeped in mysticism and steeped in spirituality. And if you don't understand that that's like the point of what they're getting at, then you're going to miss the whole thing. And I read that. I said, that is exactly how it was when I was growing up. People were like, you should read Shakespeare, and you should read Augustine, and you should read, Martin Luther, and you should, study the greats of the Western civilization. And I said, well, what is the core thing? What is the core? Is it democracy? Is it freedom? Is it love? Is it beauty? Is it Christianity? Is it secularism? I don't know. And so, because there was no clear answer, I had to go look for myself. Because in my culture, there was not something given to me that really resolved the deepest issues. And now here I am, 25 years later, talking about Imam Husayn, because once I was put in touch with the culture of Azadari, whatever way that I could access it, I said, that's what I want. I said, that is what gets at the deepest part of who I am and my aspirations for this world, my aspirations for what happens after I die, and just the deepest part of who I am. That how I can't imagine what's beyond Husayn, right? I can't imagine. It's like, I'm just trying to get to Husayn. And I said, early on, I wrote a poem called From Medina to Karbala. And I said, yeah, Husayn, I can't imagine now going to visit the messenger for the first time if you're not there with me. Like, who am I to go to your father? Please take me by the hand. And if I ever get to visit him, please bring me by the hand to visit your father as your grandfather, your father and your grandfather. Right? Because there's, people were saying, why Husayn? Why Husayn? Why Ali? Why Ya Rasulullah? Yeah, of course, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Right? And of course, Ya Allah. Right? It's like if you want to go there, Ya Allah. Right? But what did Prophet Yusuf, what was his last dua in this whole story of Yusuf? It's the biggest, longest story in the Quran. Tawaffani Muslima wa alhiqni bis salihin. Make me die in submission to you, Ya Allah, and then join me with the righteous. So the Prophet Yusuf is the last thing he says is join me with the Salihin. I sure as heck want to be joined with the Salihin, and it's hard for me to imagine who those people are other than Ahlul Kisa alayhim salam. Salawat al Muhammad. So what I would like each and every one of you to take from my remarks is the recognition that each and every one of us has to ask this religious question. Yes, I'm culturally Shi. Yes, I'm culturally connected to these rituals, these ideas, these stories, this art. But where does it really hit my heart? Where does it really become meaningful to me? Not because my parents told me, not because my government told me, not because my culture told me, not because some old man with a beard told me, but because it's what I want for myself. I know it's what I want, and I feel like I'll just spend the rest of my days trying to figure out what that looks like. And I'm deeply appreciative that I can share that with all of you, and you can be part of my life. And I hope that something that I've said will be beneficial for your life in your own ways. If anything I've said has been strange or offensive or confusing, then it's from my own imperfections, my own subjectivities, as academics like to say. And if anything I said, sort of hit you in a way that was meaningful and true and just, then that was just Allah, and He deserves all praise. Salawat ala Muhammad.
Thank you, Brother David, for sharing your personal experience with us. And I always tell my friends, the reason we love Brother David or Dr. David Coolidge It's because he never tries to erase the past or his history. And that honesty gets your attention. And I wish most of us had the brevity and self-confidence that we could talk about our history, how we learn from our past and how it helps us moving forward. I know we're late for the prayer, so I'm going to take 3 more minutes and emphasize on some of the points that Brother David made. And I think every one of us in this room are on the hook now, especially men in this room, because Brother David talked about love. When you tell someone you love them, you gotta show it in action. So it's important for all of us, family people, when we tell someone we love them, show them in action, so that we took that in heart. But then Brother David, of course, was talking about love of Imam Husayn, how we should take that in action. For all of us, it's not possible to go to Karbala every year or, do the Arbaeen thing. But one of the things that I talked about last year, I learned about Imam Husayn. I didn't know. I had the pleasure of giving a lecture here. When I read the history of Imam Husayn, last couple of years of his life in Medina, him and his entire family, you know what they were doing? They were in charge of all the homeless and poor people who were coming to the city of Medina. Because it was during the regime of Muawiyah, a lot of Meccans were pushed out, forced out, because they have they were bloodthirsty of some of those Meccans, and when Muawiyah became in power, and a lot of them were forced out of Mecca. So a lot of people were homeless, and they moved to Medina. And Imam Husayn and his family, their job was to take care of them, to place them in housing, give them food, and provide these help. So one of the things that this center does, and I think I always talk about it, it's like walking the walk of Imam Husayn, is to be with people who are disenfranchised, who are forgotten. Right? So we have a food bank here on Wednesdays and Fridays. Of course, we help people who come at the center on Wednesdays, the food bank, but there are a lot of newly migrants, Muslim families came from Yemen, from Afghanistan, from various Muslim countries. They're poor. In the beginning, they need a lot of help and support. In the center, the volunteers come here. There are ladies who come and pack their cars with food and take them to these families. Some of these families have too much pride to walk to a masjid and take food. So you could participate and think of like you were part of Husayn's army of Medina, who's taking care of the disenfranchised. There are a lot of homeless people in the city of Oakland. And, we have volunteers here come and cook on Wednesdays and Fridays every week. And they cook hot meal, really good meals. This is not leftover throwaway food. These are really nicely cooked food that people cook, keep it warm, take it to homeless. We take them supplies. A lot of Muslims are homeless. These are like African American brothers and sisters who are Muslim. But they lost their housing because in this country, if you're poor, one little mistake, you'd be on the street. And so my suggestion is to walk the walk of Imam Husayn in city of Oakland, take care of the disenfranchised people in this city, take care of the newly migrated folks from Muslim countries here who are struggling, and help them. And you could volunteer and you could donate your time, you could donate clothing you don't need, you could donate furniture you don't need. And we now have a network now. We pass these things around. Nothing in this center goes to waste. Nothing. Everything comes here, we distribute them among needy people. And so you could be part of that and walk the walk of Imam Husayn every week, and for that matter. So thank you, Brother David, putting all of us on the hook now, especially men in this room, that show your love in action. Inshallah, every one of us will take this to our heart, not only with our family, but with our dear Prophet and his Ahlul Bayt. And we will show our love for Ahlul Bayt with our actions, inshallah. May Allah make all of our intentions pure, and may Allah reward us with purity of heart and cleanness of the heart and the face on the day of judgment, inshallah. So we will have the Maghrib and Isha prayers. If we, there's a little clip at the end after the Maghrib Isha prayer we'll play. You could stay for that. And Brother David, you're on the hook. You're the Imam tonight. And I need a volunteer with beautiful voice. I see Dr. Mofared there. He has a beautiful voice. He will recite Azan, inshallah, and we'll do the Maghrib and Isha prayer, inshallah. Salawat.
Allah.